Where are we going? Welcome to this exclusive podcast produced by Spirit Watch Ministries that will show where life in our darkening times is now turning and how you can avoid the detours of deception through the hope of biblical truth. The Lord Jesus in Matthew 24 warned us over 2 millennia ago and how urgently we need to heed him now. Our host is Pastor Rafael Martinez, a seasoned Northwest Indiana-based minister, intercessor, and counter-cult apologist who will help you discern the journey of change we're all on as the last day of the last days now winds down. For more information, check out our Facebook page and our website at spiritwatch.org. Now, here's Pastor Rafael.
Well, hello, I'm Rafael Martinez. I'm a minister within the Church of God Cleveland movement and a director of Spirit Watch Ministries, and it's an outreach providing biblical discernment in a time of deception. And our podcast is called Where Are We Going? And it seeks to supply answers to a great question that a lot of people are asking these days about the direction our world is taking. As you can see from recent news or from what's going on in Ukraine to what's maybe going right outside your door, our days are increasingly becoming shadowed by more and more anxiety and violence, deception and oppression at all levels. And it's a big world full of a lot of hurt and a lot of pain. And it's difficult to really understand sometimes where our world is really heading, but what our podcast called Where Are We Going is about is something that's trying to do all it can to shine light and hope where we possibly can. And these podcasts will give you a solidly biblical perspective on our deceptive times of trouble that we're called to shed a light on. So we've been covering cultism, deception, and spiritual abuse issues since we launched a little over a year ago. And an upcoming podcast will touch on the other deeper issues driving these, sadly, all too visible signs of even deeper trouble in human society. So we really hope you'll keep joining us for those as well. It's really easy to find our podcast on the internet at our spiritwatch.org ministry website or on Facebook using the search term Spirit Watch Ministries. Now, links to them will be on our homepage and on our Facebook page as well for easy access with a couple of mouse clicks. So bookmark us and share the links with your friends, your family, your mother-in-law, your crazy aunt, Flora. I mean, anybody you possibly can. Just share them who you can, and just help us build our audience if you don't mind. We're for now available on Spotify and on a variety of different other online venues, which is really great. And we're hoping that if you're a visitor today, we want to thank you for coming by. We ask that you'll bookmark us and hope you'll find something that you'll come back to listen to. And so for today, we found it unfortunately quite necessary to continue to press on with our Ministry of Discernment, focused entirely upon the Xenos Dwell movement based in Columbus, Ohio. We've been having various ex-members of Xenos on our podcast here to give a perspective on its doings that I assure you is not something that the church is going to want anyone to, quote, dwell on, end quote, if I may be excused for the terrible pun. But the far more terrible irony isn't lost here, unfortunately. There have been a lot of dark doings in that church for decades, which can't be hidden anymore. And the Xenos Dwell community has been faced with the testimony of a growing number of its former members who indeed want to dwell on these things. And today we're going to be hosting another interview featuring one of those voices. Now, despite its professed goal of glorifying God and advancing his kingdom here on earth, as they claim to actually be doing, the movement actually has inflicted thousands of people with religious abuses easily as outrageous as those in cultic movements like the Mormon, Unification, and Seventh-day Adventist churches. What is religious abuse? Well, we're glad you asked that question. It's a very, very, very relevant one. Religious abuse is the inner psychological and emotional trauma suffered by members of authoritarian communities of faith whose leaders deceptively use manipulative teachings and practices to abusively control their thoughts and behavior, no matter the member's personal cost, and whether or not the abuse was intentional or not. Whether or not they wanted to be abusive or not is beside the point. The effect remains the same. It's most clearly seen in that micromanaged control of church members' lives, which unfortunately is all too familiar with too many people everywhere. And they're compelled to live life as their church illegitimately demands it to be lived. It's not an issue of conscience or of loving God and wanting to serve him for that reason. is something that they really believe they have to demand of you. But let's be clear on this. This is hardly the only place that this sort of abuse occurs. It's just the most visible aspect of a very toxic movement's sordid congregational dynamic. And such a group like Xenos is managed by an unconscionably compelling amount of threatenings, imposed fear and shame, and ruthlessly cold and callous discipline that underscores its seemingly benign and inspiring public image that it puts forth. Our work on a yet-to-be-released documentary on Xenos last December will document these daily abuses and spiritual outrages that the movement has perpetuated for over 50 years. We really want to get down to the bottom of that in our own small way and help provide people who've been a part of that and been affected and impacted deeply by that to go ahead and share what they've seen. Many of them are part of a second or even third generation of people raised within the movement who knew nothing else but the culture, the vibe, and the control of Xenos' worldview. And many of them are starting to realize that they're dabbling with the unforgivable sin of having a different opinion than the Xenos party line isn't really unforgivable. I'm glad to hear that many are starting to finally shake off the mind control and find their voice. And today's guest is one of these. Amy Grover, who we are delighted to invite to our virtual studio, is going to be sharing some of these insights from her own perspective. She was back in our virtual green room enjoying some of my wife's Puerto Rican flan. I hope it was good. I'm diabetic and I can't eat that stuff, but I hope you enjoyed it, Amy, and I'm sure you have a bit more to say after you brush the crumbs off. It's virtual flan, so it shouldn't be too fattening. Your background with Xenos is something that I really appreciate stepping forward to you to share. So she's with us here, and Amy, once again, it's a pleasure to have you with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
So really, what led you to step forward now to offer your testimony today?
Yeah, so just as a little background, I was born and raised in Xenos. My name may be familiar to some who are there or have been there. My mother actually joined back in the Fish House days when she was in high school, and I'm 34 to give you perspective on how long ago that was. So I grew up in the church, and my parents are both still in the church. So we've been able to negotiate kind of a relationship that works, where we don't really talk about church or spiritual things that much, just because it's such a sensitive subject for all of us. But that relationship and its importance to me was really holding me back from wanting to come out publicly like some of my friends and other, ex-members have been doing. But really the last straw for me was the response Dwell published to the Daily Beast article. There are a lot of issues with it, but the main thing that really got to me was the claim that the group does not teach people to cut out members who have left the church or who have been disciplined. And that just is blatantly untrue. I knew that from my personal experience that we can get into. But I knew from my experience that had just caused me much trauma that is definitely not the case. And I just really felt that I needed to share my story so that people know what's really going on or has gone on in the past, obviously. I've been out of the church for almost 15 years, so I can't speak to what's happening right now. But I definitely can share my experience of what I went through and what I was taught and what I was told. And it definitely wasn't what that response said they teach. Right.
Sure. Well, the Daily Beast article you're talking about, that's obviously one of the internet's most well-read websites, news websites out there. It's got its own very distinctive kind of take on things, and a lot of people read it. It's a very widely known internet e-zine, I think they called them back in those days. But what was it about? What were some of the main things that stood out from that, other than what you just mentioned, other than a completely a completely controversial thing that that somebody wrote there to it. What were some of the things about this article that apparently are getting a lot of people in Xenos pretty worked up because they had to respond to it, and apparently it's not died down. From what I understand, it's getting far more attention within leadership.
Yeah, so there definitely are a lot of things that I could respond to on it. What the overall theme that I think really bothered me about it was kind of just the attitude that Dwell's response projected.
Mm.
You know, it wasn't like listening to people to hear what has happened to them, hear their experience, and try to have some self-reflection and figure out why so many people coming out of our church are saying the same thing. It was more like, I'm going to stay at my feet and say, we did nothing wrong, we did nothing wrong, we did nothing wrong. And to me, that just showed a real lack of regard for the way that the church's actions affect other people.
Right.
And just it's just a real slap in the face, honestly, to those of us who have left and who have, gone to therapy for years and all the things that we have to do to kind of come to terms with what happened to us.
Right.
To then just say, well, this is why that's wrong and this is why that's wrong, without just having any open-mindedness to use it as an opportunity to learn, grow, improve, make the church a better place. They kind of are insistent, like, we're doing everything right, no room for growth. And so for me, that was just really distressing to see that attitude come forth from a group that, proclaims to follow Christian values. One of the main ones is repentance, and, love, compassion, and empathy, all these things. Just to not see that in that response was very disheartening. And
go ahead.
I just have one more thing.
No, go ahead.
Something that really put it into perspective for me too is my friend Katie Reinecker, who you had on your podcast a couple of weeks ago. Her boyfriend had tried to post a review on Google about Dwell, saying that something about her having been abused there. Well, he accidentally posted it on the wrong Dwell church's Google page or whatever, and that church immediately figured out how to call him. They were horrified. They were like, oh my gosh, someone's been abused by our church, tell us what happened, trying to fix it and see what happened. And just when she told that story to me, it just really sunk in. That is how a church should respond when people claim that they're being hurt and abused by their church. And this was just one person, on a Google review.
Wow.
And so, and the fact, obviously, it shouldn't even be mind-blowing, but it was mind-blowing because I'm so used to the way that Dwell Xenos responds to these things.
Wow, I didn't know about that. Wow, so there was another church that he actually posted on, and they immediately responded and reached out, and wanted to clear the air, thinking that you were speaking of them. And
they were horrified that it happened.
Wow, the difference is like night and day, isn't it? It's amazing.
Absolutely.
That article said the Daily Beast interviewed 25 former Dwell followers whose membership spans nearly 4 decades. That's unbelievable. And that's kind of where we came from in the documentary. That's about the same, what's the word I want to use? Demographic. That's about the same sort of populace that we were able to find in a week's time that approached us. And the article goes on to say, while the details of the experiences differed, the result was the same. Dwell, they all said, was a church that drew them in when they were young or lonely, showered them with attention and confidence, and then quickly turned dark. A church that pressured them to relinquish all their free time, to cut their ties with outside friends and family, to move into group houses with their fellow members. A church that dictated who they could date. A church that pressured them to stay in abusive marriages. a church that warned them that walking away from God would be walking away from God. And yet, in your situation, from what I understand, you're one of the, Amy, you actually are what I have heard called a Xenos baby. You actually were one of the first and second generations, or third generation of some that was actually raised in the church. Like you said, your parents harken back to the old days of the Fish House. Obviously, they believed in the vision that Dennis McCallum and Gary DeLashmutt were putting forth. So, what did your parents, if you don't mind me asking about that, what were your parents? How did they get involved, and how did they really, why did they stay? What was it about that really drew them to really cast their lot with them? Can you have any memories of that?
I do have some memories. Sure. My mother was raised Catholic, and she found the non-traditional and intellectual approach that, I guess, then Fish House, then Xenos, or whatever, all their iterations of names. She is a very intellectual person, so she was definitely drawn to that. My dad is kind of the opposite. He came from a kind of hard partying lifestyle, and he found a lot of freedom from that in Xenos. And so for him, that was really, I think, the primary factor that drew them there. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is that they love God. They want to follow God, and that's, for both of them, really, that's the only way that they've ever known how to do that.
Right, sure. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. That is how movements like Dwell and other abusive groups do. They attract people with very noble ideals. And there's nothing wrong with those. It's just how it gets articulated, how it gets propagated among people, and how it affects them. That's when things do get dark, So you were raised in a place like Xenos, and under that very benign and yet, very, very different influence. What was that kind of environment like? Can you recall any distinctive things about Xenos that helped you see that, you felt like you were going to change the world, and you were the truest expression of the kingdom of God? What were some of those memories like as you grew up under that kind of environment? Because that was obviously something that they obviously were propagating.
Yeah. So, it's hard because it's just such a long period of my life. It's hard to kind of summarize and isolate things.
Sure.
But I think where that really started coming out was when I was in middle school, and then then it ramps up more in high school, and then it ramps up more in the college group. I will say that because Xenos is a home church-based group, I think a lot of people have wildly different experiences, depending on, who is leading their particular home church.
Right.
So that is something that, I think is important to note, that not everyone is going to have the exact same experience.
Oh, sure. Right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, back in the high school group, especially the pressure to start bringing people out, and, I started teaching as well. When I was in high school, I would teach the middle school groups, and a couple times I taught the larger high school group as well as the small high school group. So they kind of give you this sense of purpose, which is, is not terrible in and of itself, but it's kind of presented in a way like, you're doing eternal things here. This is the most important thing. And this is the only way you can get this kind of thing. Yeah.
So as you grew, that was part of the vision that Xenos was imparting to everybody, that, that they're really, we're really a cutting edge church, and we're following the Bible more correctly or more better than others. And in essence, because we're a high commitment church, we're expecting everybody to really just put out and do whatever it takes to make things happen. And every activity was seen as a divine part of an order. And that you were just a part of that. You were seen as your obedience and activity were part of that. Is that kind of where, does that sound correct? Does that sound about right, or am I overstating it?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I would say that, I totally lost my train of thought.
Okay. It's all right.
I would say that the pressure to kind of conform and go to these meetings is just kind of it's everywhere, right? And I think where maybe this gets lost in translation when people, when the church leadership or people in the church say, oh, there's no pressure, you can choose to do whatever you want, it kind of overlooks like the coercive nature of the way that the group is set up. So you get these young, impressionable people who are excited and passionate and want to follow God, and then give them leaders who are, a lot of the high school group leaders are in college and they're cool and like older and you want to impress them. And then they are saying oh, these are the things you should do to follow God and be spiritual. So it's never presented as you have to do this if you want to be part of our group. It's if you want to grow with God, this is the next step. Okay. And if you want to become spiritually mature, you should consider doing this. So you should, it's almost always a suggestion, but that's always kind of the goal, is to move people along this pathway to more and more commitment.
Mm-hmm. Right, and so that was obviously, again, as we've been hearing, that Xenos' vision is to replicate itself and turn the world upside down and make the form of Christianity into the form of small groups, and that obviously by doing that it was going to obviously pull people into itself by recruitment that made everybody part of a home church network that was small and could be easily controlled, and that control led to really magnifying the elitism that kind of vision actually has. I mean, for a church to say, we're going to reach the world for Jesus Christ. We're going to help people become more conformed to the image of Christ, and then turn around and make conformity into or translate that conformity into a coercion, like you said, a compulsion for everybody to mimic everybody else, as opposed to really understanding what it means to walk with God on your own as an independent person. That's kind of really where that elitism comes from, because you learn pretty quickly. The leaders are those who you follow, without question, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really good point that you just made. Just kind of the idea that there is this pervasive pressure, but that, again, it doesn't come off as nefarious when you're in it, right? You're excited to be growing, and you're excited to become more involved, and the people who are, asking you to do more things are excited for you to do that, and they're excited to be asking you, and they're excited to be doing it. And just everyone is very excited to be there. And so I think that a lot of the coercive aspects of that community get lost in translation because of that, because people are making their own decisions. But this is just something I wish that the church would have a little more, or at least take some time to reflect on, okay, we are, essentially manipulating these young people into this lifestyle. Is that something we should reconsider? Is that something we should be doing, because it's having this effect that we didn't intend for it to. And so, I think that is definitely an area that the church can improve on.
Right, exactly. And that's really, the unfortunate thing, about something like Xenos. Xenos is a system of religion that comes off or tries to, it basically, what's the word I'm looking for? It really tries very hard to project this image of being the purest form of New Testament Christianity. We have, groups, we have small, caring, intimate communities. We study the Bible, we fellowship, we live with each other, we get to know each other. We as Melanie once sang in a song so many years ago, we bleed into everybody else's wounds. We know one another, we love each other, and we care for one another. And in the middle of all that, it becomes obvious that this is something that everybody is taught is normal. And then when you're taught that something is normal, then all the other conditions that they say go with it just become unquestioned, right? You really just at that point are at a loss to really understand how you can even ask questions. I mean, is that fair, or does that sound about an overstatement of the problem?
Yeah, I think that is fair. I think that it depends whether or not you can really get away, quote unquote, with like asking questions or being, not certain something is done correctly. A lot of it depends on like where you are, how far along in the like process you are. So if you're someone who's been there for a long time and you're trying to move into leadership, or they're trying to move you into leadership, obviously, if you start having doubts and like asking questions, that's going to be a huge deal and it's going to be a big problem. If you're, relatively new to the church, they're very encouraging of questions, but only so that they can correct your misconceptions that you might have about what the truth is. And I think that is a big part of what makes Xenos so dangerous and harmful, is that they, in their minds, have the backing of God. They have the backing of the Bible, and everything that they do, they have a Bible verse they can point to and said, see, God said we should do this, and so it's what we do. Like, everything has a Bible verse. And so, it makes it really dangerous and makes it really hard for people in the group to hear any criticism from the outside, because they're like, but the Bible, and we follow the Bible, and we're a Bible-based church. And it always comes back to their interpretation of the Bible is the one true way to interpret the Bible, and therefore they have God's backing on all these things that they do.
Right. Anyone outside that circle can't possibly really understand what they are doing unless you're a part.
Exactly.
And that's, and I've been doing this, throughout our interviews with people, with various ex-members, when they bring something up point. One of the things that for me just so really closes the deal and really demonstrates that Xenos is cultic is what is that the principle you're describing so well there. And that's analogous to what I've been talking about the past few months, and I really hope people have been able to catch that. Because to me, a cult is not just doctrine alone. It's not just, and that's something that they take great pains in Xenos to kind of prove with all the papers and things they write about cults. I was reading one today. I can't remember who wrote it, but they make great pains at pointing out that cultism it certainly does involve doctrinal aberrancies, denial of the Trinity, blah blah blah, et cetera, et cetera. And then it goes also on to point out the fact that cults are also places that they quoted one expert as saying, in a cult group, you're not allowed to question or doubt a tenet or rule, or to call attention to factual information that suggests some internal contradiction within the belief system, or a contradiction with what you've been told. Now, that's Margaret Singer, who is a well-known and sadly dearly departed one of the truly great cult experts of the 20th century, and they quoted that in this paper, and they even go on to say cults prohibit members from dissenting or disagreeing with the prerogatives of the church. I find that how interesting for them to hide behind that like a fig leaf, to take that kind of principle of truth and use it as a way to say, well, we don't do that. We certainly don't do it like that, but in essence, they do. And the principle that I was talking about that is most clearly documented here is and Singer talks about it here. She doesn't mention it specifically, but she's actually speaking of it. It's a principle that Robert J. Lifton, another guy that they quote in this same paper, I believe, he wrote a book called Thought Control or Thought Reform in the Psychology of Totalism, and he was one of the first researchers to really set forth the notion of cultic mind control. And he called it thought reform, and there were 8 principles he described, and one of those, which I just mentioned, you described so well, is called, and which Singer spoke of, is called the sacred science, and that's exactly what Xenos sets itself to be the sole guardians of, the great heralds of. It's a group's unique claims, authority, or wisdom that's supported by or being perfectly compatible with established biblical, scientific, historical, or psychological truths, and that these truths have to be accepted without question. It's a profound revelation that can't be understood anywhere else, but by having the mindset that only a member would have. Their insights and teachings are presented as a perfect harmony of cutting-edge scientific or achievement that's never been achieved before by any other human endeavor. And that's exactly what you're saying. And it can't be questioned because it's sacred. It's from God. It cannot be denied. And that's exactly what Xenos does. And that is one, I can go right down the list, but that's one of the many things Xenos does that proves to me that it is indeed quite cultic, even when it takes the words of cult experts to kind of hide behind.
I absolutely agree with you that they definitely dodge the cult thing a lot. Even actually in their response to the Daily Beast, when I was reading through it, I noticed that, let's see, I'll actually read it because I have it up.
Yeah.
There was a quote from the article that says, while the group might not have a classic charismatic leader, its adherence to a single strict ideology still dominates members' lives. Mm-hmm. Its network of home church leaders are deputized to enact that ideology, isolating them from the outside world and leaving them in a bounded reality. And then the response to that was, this person's own definition of a cult requires a central leader who is authoritarian. There's no such person in our church. So they responded to, this wide kind of, they do this and they do this and they do this, like, but we don't have a central leader, so we're not a cult. And don't address, the issues as far as the adherence to a single strict ideology that dominates members' lives, isolating them from the outside world and leaving them in a bounded reality. It's just like, but this doesn't absolutely fit the definition of a cult, therefore we're fine.
Yeah,
it's just,
right.
it's just such a dishonest way to engage with that, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. It's the emperor marching through the middle of town, and it's the one kid that wakes up, hey, he's got no clothes on. And that's the thing. That's exactly what you see. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. This is a movement that is so tone deaf to itself. It can't see the forest for the trees. And they just cannot understand. I don't think they still understand. I think personally that their consciences and whatever faculties of that would transmit and interpret for them genuine feelings of remorse or regret are just some things that I really think that they've suspended or completely blown away. And that's something that in high pressure groups like Xenos will happen. Do you remember seeing I know that Jessica and Katie had they were your, I guess, friends of yours, that you guys really knew each other, and talking with them, and others, they began to recognize a lot of good, sincere, zealous young men and women become robots, become literal puppets of an idea, of that ideology that made them into something that ceased them, for lack of a better word. They stopped becoming who they were, and they took on a mindset and a programming that really made them become slaves, literal slaves. And you were raised, however, to just accept that as normative. I'm sure that, when those became your marching orders, your lifestyle, it was no big deal to you, right? It was just the way it was.
So I do think it's interesting because I can't wrap my mind fully around and reconcile the way that my mother and father raised me with Xenos. My mother particularly raised me to be very curious and think about things and be intellectual and questioning and all these kinds of things. So I don't want to say that I was raised to just accept things.
Right.
My experience with Xenos was that Xenos raised me in its role in my life to be unquestioning of things. Right. And I actually think this is a good segue to talk kind of about my personal experience that I had in the church.
Exactly. Right. What was that like? How much of that was, kept you rooted into that?
Yeah. So, I could talk for hours about my experience, but I think the biggest thing that I still to this day struggle with, is, shortly after Katie, who you had on a few weeks ago, shortly after she left the church, she was in a very serious car accident, where she broke her pelvis and was in the hospital and had surgery and everything. And the driver of the car died. He passed away, unfortunately, her friend who was driving. So, after that, I obviously freaked out and I went to go visit her at the hospital. She wasn't in the church anymore, but I still loved her very deeply. I still do to this day. And I just, wanted to be with her, wanted to care for her, wanted to just be a friend, like a normal human being.
Yeah.
And, I remember being in the hospital. It was in Cincinnati, and I got a call from my boyfriend at the time who had been talking to leadership, and he was basically like, this doesn't change anything, right? You still can't be involved in her life. You can't, and this was something that I was told over and over again when she left, after her accident, all these things, that I had to cut her off because that was the loving thing to do for her, is to not continue to give her, my love and affection, which was, by proxy God's love, because she had chosen to walk away from God, because she had chosen to ignore God's will for her life, apparently, by choosing to leave the church. And, that was something that Katie has since obviously forgiven me. And, I will say that I have never forgiven myself, and I don't know if I ever will be able to, for not being there for her during that incredibly painful time in her life. But that for me was just kind of where I started to really start to see the level of mind control that was going on, where I was told, because of the beliefs of the church, which they say are what the Bible teaches, that I wasn't allowed to help my friend recover from a horrifying accident because she wasn't following God. And that I wasn't allowed to have a different opinion on that. I wasn't allowed to be well, I think this. I wasn't allowed to fight with it. I just had to accept it and do it. And I did accept it and I did do it. And I didn't leave the church for a couple of years after that. But that, I think, was really just what started unraveling things for me, was having to go through just that. It was all honestly like emotional torture, like to have this person that I love more than anything and just having to cut them off and have people tell me, if you love her, you will cut her off. If you don't cut her off, you're not loving her. That, you know, it's your flesh that wants to go spend time with her. You're being selfish because you want to spend time with her and it will feel good to you. You need to ignore that because God wants her to hit rock bottom in the world so that she'll come back. If she has you in your life, then she's not going to hit rock bottom.
Yeah, right. And yours is certainly a testimony that we've heard over and over again, how absolutely abhorrent, onerous, wrong, for lack of a better word, that it actually is. I mean, it's just absolutely unconscionable for me to believe that a Christian church is actually directing people to cut them off just because they have questions or have issues in their life. When I read scripture, as a pastor, as a minister, I read in that. I read in for example, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, that kind of action certainly is alien to what the apostle says here. He says, if any man obey not our word by this epistle, note that man have no company with him, and that he may be ashamed. Now, I think that's where Xenos is trying to get all of its fire and thunder. And yet, they kind of forget the next part of the verse. Count him not as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother. So there's continued contact. There's continued care and loving. The word here, admonish, is meant to be something that you do in love. If I had any of my brothers around, my personal blood brothers, and they're caught up in something, I would certainly, have words with them, but I wouldn't cut them off. I would certainly, make my views known, but I wouldn't cut them off. I mean, that's just not what the scripture here is saying. It says you're supposed to admonish them. But Xenos apparently feels that's too much, or did I mistranslate that part of the Bible wrong?
So I think that I want to be very clear that it's not if someone's sinning, cut them off. That's very much not what it is. But there's kind of this mindset that is taught and kind of perpetuated in Xenos, that you basically have two options in life. You can follow God, and that the best way you can do that is by doing all the Xenos stuff, or you can not follow God, reject his will for your life, and go and be part of the world, where you're getting drunk all the time and having casual sex and doing drugs and stealing things, it's just this very black and white, like the world is this awful, terrible place. And when people leave, they are doing awful, terrible things. And so that mindset, I think, kind of fuels this notion that if someone leaves the church or decides, like, I'm not going to follow God anymore in the way that you have prescribed that I need to do it, I think people kind of get in their head like, oh, well, that means that they're, drinking all the time and having sex with everyone. And like, they're just this like sinful person now that, and we have to just let them, they have to realize for themselves how terrible that is and how unfulfilling it is. And then they'll come back. They'll come back, on their hands and knees begging for us to help them because they're so unhappy. And so I think that especially when people, choose to leave the group, it may be different if they're like going to a different church, but if they choose to like not be involved with God anymore, right? They don't want to follow that path, then it's like they got to be cut off because they have to realize how bad it is so that they'll come back to God. And that's why it's loving. That's why, that's why it's the caring thing to do for them, because, obviously following God is the best thing for them. It's the only way they're going to be happy. How could they be happy out in this big, bad, terrible world?
Right.
So, yeah, it really just warps the way that you look at things and really obviously it just really changes it. I remember believing wholeheartedly that God was calling me to suffer and to, cut Katie out of my life, even though I desperately wanted her to be in it and I desperately wanted to help her and comfort her. He was calling me to do that as this kind of trial to help, further his purpose.
Right.
And looking back, I'm obviously, that is insane. That's absolutely crazy. But at the time, I wholeheartedly believed that, and I thought I was doing the right thing.
Right. Right. And right. I mean, because that's what your heart and your conscience were telling you. So look, I want this woman in my life because I love her. She's my friend. She's a dear person to me. And she's left the church. Well, obviously, because leadership says so, because this is what the Bible supposedly says. I am to count them as an enemy. I'm not to talk to them at all. I'm not to have anything to do with them. But again, getting back to what I share in Scripture, that's not what it says. You were following the spirit of that verse in your heart and mind, but the church was telling you, no, that's not right. That's not biblical. And that just has to set up the most horrible, dissonance within. I mean, and you said at that point, that's what really led you to really start thinking about and re-examining, what you really saw. Did you have discussion with this, with anyone in the church or your family or friends within Xenos, about that kind of struggle within, or was that a conversation you really felt you couldn't have with anybody there?
Yeah, I really didn't feel like I could talk to anyone about it. Just because, at that point I was in leadership training. So I was working on moving up in the group into a position of leadership in a home church. I was kind of next in line for that, getting trained, and I didn't, to be able to be in that position, you'll have to prove your commitment and your devotion, over time. And so I didn't really feel like I could express any of my doubts or concerns, because that, while allowed, it's always allowed. You're allowed to say whatever you want. You're allowed to believe whatever you want, but it has consequences. Mm-hmm. And it has consequences on how you're viewed in the group and, the rewards that you can get as far as teaching or discipling other people or becoming a leader. All of that is very much contingent on drinking the Kool-Aid, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that, that is something that in the response to the Daily Beast articles, Xenos also did, was kind of oh, well, anyone can do anything. And it's no one's forcing anyone to do anything. It's correct. No one is holding a gun to anyone's head and saying, you have to do this or I'm going to shoot you. If that's your definition of pressure or forcing people to do things, then I guess you are correct. However, the way that the group is set up is highly coercive, and it rewards people. It rewards people who subscribe to the party line and punishes those who do not.
Yeah.
And it's very clear. It's very obvious to all, even though it's never said explicitly.
Right. And it comes out in the most innocuous, intimate, and yet deeply personal ways that are most impacting to young people. It comes out in small groups. It comes out with disciplers who end up having to, basically compel obedience or submission in some way, right? I mean, that's and to question that is to question God. I mean, that's what I keep hearing again and again and again. And then when the pain gets spread all over, the church will say, well, it's not their fault. You misunderstood us, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what they do. And I've noticed I also noticed in the response to the Daily Beast article, and I've noticed this in other responses, that the high up leadership in Xenos really punts a lot of responsibility for things that happen in home churches. They're like, oh, we're a decentralized church, and, there's all these different leaders, and, maybe this happened here, but it was an isolated event, or just being like, oh, we don't teach this, therefore it clearly couldn't have happened. And instead of, taking responsibility for these leaders that they train and they oversee and they raise up, they kind of say, well, we don't explicitly teach this, so therefore if it's happening, it's not supposed to.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
You need to consider what are the structural issues that if this is really not something you are teaching your home church leaders to do, why do so many of them think it's something that they should do? Right. And the answer is either that they actually are teaching it, or that there's something in the way that the system is set up that makes people think this is what they are being taught.
Right. And then, like you said, when your experience doesn't line up with what they tell you you should be feeling, guess whose fault it is? It can't be it can't be the sacred science. It's perfect. You can't you can't question that. It's from God. So therefore, we have to find some other convenient way to explain away clearly what's going on here, and that's something that Xenos is quite brilliant at in mustering its apologies for its actions among itself. I want to play a clip for you, and you can tell me who this is. I'm pretty sure you will recognize who this person is speaking. Is a dwell leader who really, I think, really makes the point that we're talking about, and it speaks directly to the struggle you had, and after you dealt with it, you finally understood, what was going on, what the context was behind Jessica and everybody else's defections from Xenos. This leader really tries to put their own spin. I'd like you to listen to this. And the leader, I believe, is it James? James Rochford? I believe it's who he is.
Yes.
When you start seeing everything through a cynical lens, the less you can see reality, and all you can see is your lens. It's a narrative, making unfalsifiable claims. How is it in a post-truth culture that this would work? I was really hurt by somebody in your church. Okay, who was it? Well, I don't want to say. Okay, well, what's your name? I don't want to say that either. What did they do? Well, I don't want to say that either. How can we apologize or grow or help others if we can't actually look into the story involved? I can't tell you how many cases I've run into of people where I'm saying, hey, I'm here to help. If something like that happened, I would want to offer a word of correction and actually speak to the person who said or did that to you. Instead, making an unfalsifiable claim, I can't do anything. And so it lingers as kind of just a vague cloud that we can't interact on this at all.
And here he is. He's wanting us to understand that this is just that people who want to come forward and be honest with Xenos, and who basically want to avoid from being re-victimized without actually getting into all their details, are just ruthlessly pressed aside, pushed aside. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, so there was definitely a lot of that in James Rockford's response to the Daily Beast article that I keep talking about because it was just so terrible. But I think that what that says to me is Xenos approaches everything like this on the defensive. Right? Like his first instinct isn't to listen, to hear the experience, to try to understand what happened. His first instinct is to be like, well, can you prove it? And I need to be able to investigate this, so you have to tell me the name and you have to blah, 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 like all these things, instead of, what motivation would someone have for just making up a story like this? Like, I don't understand what they think is happening with all these people coming forward and saying that they were abused, that they suffered, that they experienced all these horrible things, if they're not telling the truth. And just like, I'm not saying obviously they can't investigate or like try to, hear other sides of the story, but I think it really represents just a refusal to even listen in the first place and try to learn. And even if it comes out, right, that like what this person is saying happened, could be explained through some other thing or whatever, like it wasn't exactly how it happened. That's how this person perceived this. That is how they experienced your church. And what could the church do to make sure that more people don't have that experience?
Right.
Like, and I want them to just look at these things with a much more open mind and an open heart to try to like change, even if they don't think they're doing anything wrong, quote unquote wrong. This keeps happening. And there are so many people that have had this experience. And I don't know how you can just look at that and say like, no, we're right. We're fine. That was okay. And that was okay. And that was okay. Like maybe you can technically argue you didn't do anything wrong, but is that what you want? Do you want to be technically right, or do you want to be loving? And do you want to have a positive impact on people?
Right.
Like, I don't, it's just the mindset is baffling to me. Like, if someone came and told me this is how, as a person, as a human being who is not trying to be a church, not trying to share God's love with people, I'm just a human trying to live my life. Someone came to me like, hey, this thing you did made me feel this way, and I had this experience because of it.
Right.
I would think about that, and I would see if there was something, like, even if I think I didn't do anything wrong, okay, I should technically be allowed to do that, or it's okay to do that. It's not immoral to do that. But I don't want to make people feel bad. I don't want to hurt people. So maybe I will need to change my behavior in the future so that I don't do this again. It's just like basic being a human stuff. And it blows my mind that they just refuse to engage on the stuff on that, or even really on any level besides trying to defend themselves and deflect all these accusations.
Right. They're actually being quite consistent though with the way that they've structured themselves. I mean, they Xenos does claim to be a pretty deep intellectual church in itself. They have classes in apologetics and worldviews and philosophy and et cetera, et cetera. And throughout this whole shtick that Rockford put. And by the way, the name of that talk was Committed Christianity in a Post-Truth Culture. That was done back in, I believe, in February or January, not too long after we had the meeting, or tried to have the meeting with Dennis and Gary. That's when me and Megan Cox had visited the offices and had the now infamous Zoom meeting that they immediately put it on the internet. We never agreed to that. We never discussed it, but in retrospect, I really could care less. I think it really just kind of showed really how much more dedicated to defending the party line they really were. But this talk came after that, and the talk really was just focused upon an argument, not a dialogue, but an argument. And to me, it kind of showed me to what end any attempt at dialogue would actually end up in resulting in. I mean, the point he made there, he said it's impossible to apologize, grow, or help others if you don't know the people involved. And the question is, why is that? Why does that follow? I mean, if something was done wrong, and for them, and they might claim that there were people who they say made unfalsifiable claims because they didn't know who they were, or they didn't identify them. And that's one of the things that they pressed home with us as well. If you don't tell us who these people are, how can we investigate? How can we know what really happened? The point is, they're hearing now, and they've known people like you and others for quite a few years. They've known people who've approached them about these things. They have known situations, and they've just completely blown them away, completely dismissed them as just these cynical, anti-religious people who have their own narratives and their own agenda. And in fact, if you watch this video, which is on YouTube, by the way, when you watch this video, they really get into a laundry list of things that they feel that you should be looking at, and one of those lists they make specifically relates to basically their arguments that they make. They believe that the Dwell is being attacked by postmodernistic critics who use the internet to spread misinformation, who dehumanize by anonymity, who silence those who disagree, who utilize this cynical narrative. And really, though, I think that could be less your concern at the time you were leaving, right? You were just being someone that really had questions, and you realized you couldn't answer. You couldn't get those answers anymore. You couldn't feel safe in harboring anything different than the party line. Is that kind of where you were going with that helped you re-examine and finally leave Dwell, or what was going on at that point?
Yeah, so I definitely had started to question things, and then when I turned 20, the ripe old age of 20, I started to really question these things that I had just been like told as facts like my whole life.
Yeah.
And I also became, interested in seeing what else was out there outside the very small world of Xenos. So I actually, I experimented a little bit with some drinking, and I made out with a couple boys because I'm a horrible, dirty sinner. And so then I got, actually removed from my, ministry house, and I was asked to step down from leadership in, I was working in the high school group at the time as a leader. So I was asked to step down from that. And then, I was discipling 2 people, and they both kind of fired me as their discipler. So I wasn't kicked out of the church, but I had definitely undergone this discipline. I was also removed from sitting in on the college group leadership meetings. And so after that, things are just very awkward. I would come to the group and people would kind of talk to me, but I felt like I was a new person, like I was no longer a part of the group. And then having the distance of not living in the ministry house and not spending every waking second of my life with Xenos people doing Xenos things, I just started leaning more into my questions and thinking about things. And so then I ended up kind of just fading out from the group. I didn't have a dramatic departure.
Right.
But, that was...
You basically walked away.
Yes, I did. Yeah. And so, but I want to make it very clear, I did not walk away because I didn't want to follow God. I still loved God with all my heart. I have memories of just laying in bed, crying out to God, why is this happening? Why can't, I want to believe this. This is, I want you to make yourself known to me. And, obviously Xenos was not doing that for him. So, I think that's because it is so extreme. I think that Xenos does really, push people away who otherwise would be followers of God or would, be devoted and loving Christians. I think kind of gives this impression that this is the only way to follow God, and it's very intense. They describe it as warfare, right? You're a soldier in a battle, all these things. It's all very intense, and you have to do all this stuff. And if you don't do that, you might as well just not do anything.
Right. It's a very militant, very, very militant imagery, and there's no room to turn around, stop, and pick you back up. You better be marching.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, especially once you get into I think part of the reason I was disciplined so harshly is because I had been set out as a model. I had been sent out as a leader, someone to aspire to be like. And so I feel like they felt like they had to make an example out of me and, make sure people know it's not okay to kiss boys.
Well,
it's a bit of an exaggeration, but
I understand, right. Well, it just
joking
seems,
is my coping mechanism.
and that's perfectly understandable. Hey, that's humor is sometimes the best way to handle this sort of thing. It certainly is. So you walked away, and what was that like? What's it been like since you've gone? What have you? What is it about the outside world that seems to be connecting with you?
Yeah. So for the longest time, when I explain this, I say I had to learn how to be a human because I didn't know how to be a human. I didn't know how to make decisions for myself. I didn't know how to analyze options and decide this is what I think I should do, right? Every decision that I made in Dwell was, okay, here are the options. What does God say I should do? What does my discipler say I should do? It was never, I was always trying to figure out, what God's will for my life was over every detail. And so I had to learn at 21 for the first time how to decide things. And I had to learn, how to have normal interactions with people because, in Xenos, everything was if you're interacting with someone in the church, you're supposed to be trying to serve them. You're supposed to be, trying to build them up. You're supposed to be fellowshipping. And if you're interacting with someone who's not a believer, then you're supposed to be trying to get to know them so that you can bring them to group and save their soul. And so, I didn't know how to just talk to people. All these very basic human things that I had no idea how to just do on my own. So that was very challenging, and it took some trial and error, but I think I'm pretty, I can make decisions now sometimes. So there's that.
Okay. All right. So in leaving then at that point, really, it sounds to me like you said, and that's certainly not an isolated thing. I mean, so many people testified the same thing after leaving a place like Xenos, and others from Xenos I spoke with it said the same thing. They literally were so conditioned to teach people to look unto others to do their thinking for them, to help them make their decisions. That leaving a group like that and setting out on your own is really quite a brave act. It's something that you're trying to build your own foundation with, and I really am just so saddened to hear that a place supposedly set up to help you become who you're supposed to be. By walking with God and knowing Him personally and intimately and serving His Son, and that whole enterprise just became a huge exercise of indoctrination by phobias and by controlling it and really making you completely dependent upon them, and that sometimes just that the shock of leaving that can be so destructive for so many people, and I'm glad that you've been able to really integrate that more into that. So what are some of the key things you would say to people who are listening right now who might be thinking about, they might be at the point where they're thinking about really taking to heart what you're saying and re-examining what it is that they're struggling with? What would you say to people who are maybe listening to you and realizing that maybe they need to re-examine their own involvement? What would you say to them that would help them see that might not necessarily be a bad thing?
Yeah. So, to anyone who is considering, if they want to be involved with Dwell, if they're considering leaving, obviously everyone is in a different situation. I think the best advice that I can give you is to try to get some space, however you can, from the group. So I don't know if it's a, family of vacation with your family who's not in Dwell, or whatever you need to do to kind of get away from it for a little while and just spend some time thinking about you and who you are and what you really want and what you believe, and if you think what is happening in the group is right, and if you agree with the direction that the church is going. And I know it can be challenging, especially if you've been in it for a long time, to know your actual thoughts and opinions about things. But the space definitely, helps with that, because you just just take some time to be quiet and by yourself, and just try to look into your heart and see what you believe, or what you have questions about if you don't know what you believe. And I think, I would just definitely recommend to keep thinking, keep questioning, and try to take some space from that, like, environment of just a constant barrage of, like, Xenos. I guess it is now.
Right. It's not necessarily a bad thing to sleep in on Sundays, is it? I don't think it is.
It's definitely.
I think it's a good thing.
Not a bad thing.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to be in service with people and fellowship. Nothing wrong with any of that. I'm certainly, as a Christian minister, certainly believe in spiritual formation and fellowship, but certainly not the way Xenos is doing it. That's certainly something that has become, sadly, a very toxic form of very brutally victimizing religious abuse, as we start our podcast with. And is there anything else you'd like to say? Maybe there's some people who you really deeply care about, who you might know are still in, that you maybe like to leave a message with, or maybe you'd like to check in with them and say what it is that's on your mind. As we close here, is there something else you would like to say to them, or anyone specific that you'd like to speak to? Maybe you want to speak to the powers, that the powers that be, or maybe there's someone that might be listening who you've not been in touch with. I mean, is there anything you'd like to leave behind?
Yeah, I do want to speak to the powers that be. I would just really ask the leadership, if they hear this, to just really take some time to try to self-reflect and see, obviously we're not going to agree on maybe a lot of things, but to see if there's anywhere in the church where they think they could improve the way that they are affecting people. There are now hundreds, maybe thousands of people who have come out with these stories of how Xenos has deeply hurt them. And I would just ask the leadership to have a more open heart and mind to those stories, and just try to just at least be open to considering it. The way that leadership has responded to these accusations has just shown a complete disregard and unwillingness to consider that they did anything wrong. And maybe that's, not how they feel in their hearts. Maybe they have considered it and they've come to this conclusion, but know that the front you're presenting to the world is a defensive one that does not seem open to change or growth or anyone's stories, and doesn't seem to care about the hurt that they've caused. So obviously I can't judge what's in their heart, but that is what their response is communicating. And so I would just ask leadership to reconsider and try to just honestly respond to these accusations. And if the church has done something wrong, or it has done the things that they have been accused of, and they don't think that it's wrong, just be honest and explain your position on it. The way that it's been dodged and everything like that is just not okay. Yeah. And so that's my spiel.
Well, I certainly cannot agree with you more, and I certainly would hope, although unfortunately I just can't be compelled to hold my breath, that the leaders of Xenos and Dwell that are listening today, as I know you will be, I hope that you go back and read those verses again, and then you got, like she said, like Amy has pointed out, well, you need to really look deep within yourselves and see where you have missed the turn. You've missed the turn completely, and you simply don't understand what the road ahead is for you. You really think you know where you're going, but you've been powering an engine of abuse, and it's tragic that people people outside the fellowship there can see the abuses and you can't. You instead choose to hide behind your mountains of words and apologies and papers that you create. And you just really don't see that when one person is hurt, that's one too many. And God will hold you accountable for that. And really, I really don't want to be anywhere near the throne of judgment when God speaks to you about that. And that's something you can still change, though. You can still do something good. You can still turn things around. I hope, indeed, that that's something that God really will really speak to you very directly about. And Amy, once again, thank you so much for the time today. And it's been enlightening, and I'm hoping to have you and other people back on pretty soon here. We've got some interesting projects we're working on, and I appreciate your sharing this specific Saturday. Thank you so much, and I think my wife's got some more flan back there. You can take it home when you leave.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Bye now.
Thanks for listening today as we explored just where are we going. Our prayer is that you have been encouraged and strengthened, and if necessary, challenged in your daily journey through life. Jesus is coming. You can fall with the night, or you can rise with the sun. The choice is yours. You can email us with questions and comments at feedback@spiritwatch.org. And if you need urgent personal spiritual help, email us at help@spiritwatch.org. We look forward to hearing from you. Please follow our podcasting at our Facebook page and our website at spiritwatch.org. This podcast is a production of Spirit Watch Ministries, taking heed that no man deceives you.